Hello and welcome to the Cybersecurity Innovation Podcast. This is your host, Cody Hackett. Welcome to today's episode where we're speaking to Gary Hayslip. Gary has an extensive background with the Chief Information Security CISO role from several different industries, DoD with the U.S. Navy, CISO of the City of San Diego, and private industry Chief Information Security Officer for Webroot. Today we're going to be speaking about all things related to the day in the life of a Chief Information Security Officer and some of the challenges and modern challenges of being a CISO. So without further ado, well, Gary, I've been following your work for quite some time, and I have to say you're probably one of the most well-respected individuals in our industry and in this field. So for that, I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Oh, thank you very much.
There's of course a ton of things that I personally am interested in asking you, but for kind of the theme for today's shorter session, I read a very interesting article that you wrote about the challenges of why CISOs, Chief Information Security Officers, fail. And I really wanted to dive in and maybe take a deeper dive and hear from you kind of some of those things that you for one wrote about. But first, before we get into that, the audience and the listeners kind of stem from people just getting into security all the way to the most sophisticated of our professionals. So can you just give us kind of, for starters, just a background, maybe just a layman's brief background on the role of a Chief Information Security Officer? How long has it been around, who they report to, just kind of general background on the CISO role itself?
Sure. I mean, it's kind of interesting because, 10 years ago, there really weren't Chief Information Security Officers.
Right.
Yeah, they were really just like security managers or security team leaders. They were pretty much, the men and women that were, honestly, they were in the back room somewhere. No one really knew who they were. They were typically the person that was called in when things got really ugly and something had happened on the network. And they, almost 99% of the time, they reported to the CIO, or somebody who was running IT. About 5 years ago is when we started seeing the CISO role start to become dominant. We started seeing a lot of it. We started seeing people, with the Chief Information Security Officer title, and that started becoming more common, even in smaller companies, which at the time really surprised me. We also started seeing a lot more of, I'm on the board for the CISO roundtable here in San Diego. So we've got about 130 some CISOs that are members. 5 years ago when we took a poll, it was roughly about 80% of the membership reported to CIOs and about 20% reported to other. And that 20% that reported to other were predominantly financial, or banking, related CISOs. And they were reporting to people other than the CIO due to, regulatory requirements. And today, what's interesting is today, you take a look at CISOs, and if I was to go ahead and do that same poll today, it's probably about a 60-40 split, between our members, 60% other, 40% CIO. That's how much it's shifted in 5 years. And the way I see a CISO as a Chief Information Security Officer is not really a technology person. I really look at it as we are business executives who just happen to use technology and people and processes and frameworks and stuff to do our jobs, which is to manage risk. We manage risk across the business, across the enterprise, and we get called in to work with all kinds of different types of projects and initiatives and third-party, suppliers and partners. And many times it's a question of, okay, we're going to go ahead and connect our network to theirs, and due to this regulation or due to this compliance certification we have, what risks are we looking at? What things do we need to adjust? Who do we need to notify? Type of thing. And so I find the job quite interesting. It's gone way beyond just managing firewalls.
Right. So let's dive into it. And thanks for the kind of the background on the CISO role in itself. But I'm really interested in this article that you wrote. I've read it. The challenges that cause CISOs to fail. Would you mind just talking through some of these key points? At least you don't have to go into as much depth per se as the article, but just elaborate. For the listeners, some of those things like culture, budget, et cetera, that cause CISOs to fail in a modern day.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you, I originally put that together, and a lot of it was a discussion with peers of mine that, there was a major misunderstanding on the executive teams. What we're seeing is that, organizations are hiring CISOs. There's a big movement of CISOs moving around right now, and
Yeah.
companies are hiring CISOs. But one of the things that, is frightening in some ways is that people don't understand the role. Businesses don't really understand what the role does. They just
Yeah.
know that they need someone to manage security, but they don't know what to do with the person. So they go ahead and they hire, a CISO, and they still don't understand the roles and the responsibilities and what authority they need, and for them to be able to operate and be effective. And so I decided to go ahead and write this article about things that tend to just wreak havoc, for CISOs being able to do their jobs. Because whether you like it or not, hey, we're a business executive, we're there, we're supposed to be part of the leadership team, we're managing risk for the company. All right, that sounds great, except we're also a major change agent. CISOs don't do their job without changing things. That tends to piss people off.
Yeah.
Employees tend to get really upset because you're changing the way they've always done things.
Right.
Business culture can be brutal on CISOs. And so that's one of the things that I actually talk a lot about with with my peers is
Yeah.
that in being a business executive, you really need to understand the business. You need to understand how it actually operates, what it needs, what resources, what people are critical, what data and applications they use. You need to be talking with your peers in the other departments, and some fish tacos and beer after work, get to know them, establish relationships, because you need this stuff so that you better understand risk. You better understand your impact as a security executive on the company when you want to make change. And honestly, that's a lot of what the article was about, is that companies don't understand that role. And so they don't give the CISO the resources he or she needs to be successful, to
Yeah.
actually do their jobs. And then there's also a whole component on the CISOs too, where they don't understand the business. And not understanding the business where they operate in, they get bit by compliance, and because they've missed something,
Yeah.
um, or the business culture itself. The business culture itself, they get hit there because they went ahead and people don't understand what they're doing, so there's pushback, and there's a lot of the secret stuff going on behind the scenes, and people are a lot of the shadow IT stuff going on,
Yeah.
and people aren't following your controls and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And it's because they don't understand what you're doing. You haven't made the case. They don't trust you.
Yeah.
And so it is. So that's the reason why I wrote this article, was to highlight, for businesses, to get them to understand that, hey, some of these things that you're doing make it almost impossible for a CISO to do their job. But at the same time, to also highlight to some of my peers, hey, some of the things that you're doing,
Yeah.
make it impossible for you to be effective too. Let's talk. Let's take a look at these and look at some of the ways in which we could deal with each of these issues.
Interesting. So what are some of those things that not to talk just about the articles you've written, but you did talk a lot about some things that you would give your younger self, advice, lessons learned, things like that. What are some of those things that you have learned over the course of your career that if you were looking at, or if anyone was looking at wanting to be or aspire to be a CISO, what are some of those things that come to mind quickly that you would want to educate them on?
I mean, I think one of the biggest things, and in that article, the Younger Me article,
Yeah.
I actually talk about it, and I've also, I've had it in several keynotes that I've done just recently where I've spoken about it too. Is that in the job as a CISO, not everything is a technology issue.
Mm.
There's a lot of times when you're dealing with a problem and there's risk involved, there's some type of risk exposure to the company, and you're trying to figure out what's going on. Two of the biggest things that I wish I would have really thought about years ago when I first got into this, one was the fact that I don't own the risk. The risk is actually the businesses. It belongs to the organization.
Oh, gotcha. Right.
And because it's decisions that the business has made over time, and typically it's because of businesses they've made concerning technology, new services, whatever it is, and my job is to understand that risk, make it visible, document it, monitor it, bring it to the table so we as a leadership team can make decisions on how we want to manage it, but I don't own it. And the reason I bring that up is because when I was younger, I used to stress so bad about all these things. And now that I better understand, how businesses run and how leaderships run and stuff like that, and I'm better able to articulate that case about risk ownership, I don't stress about that so much, and another issue that I talk about a lot, is that it's not always a technology issue. I mean, you just, you don't always need another blanky box to go ahead and fix things. There's a lot of times that, problems that you have, whether you like it or not, tend to be carbon-based life forms. Employees or old work processes and just things that have been done before. And that's where you really need to understand a company's business culture, because there are times you're going to have to use that business culture as an asset to help you change something, or there are times you need that business culture to be a champion to help you get resources and to do things that the company really needs to do to protect itself, but they don't want to.
Right. And so the other interesting thing that I find interesting is this idea of this legacy networks, whether it's like you just mentioned, legacy processes, and there's all these challenges that you walk into a new company if you're becoming a new CISO. I mean, how do you deal with some of these things, whether it's the culture, legacy, approaches, legacy networks, compliance? I mean, it seems like it's got to be one of the most stressful jobs that there is out there to walk into.
Well, I mean, and that's the reason why, we've had a lot of recent research come out that's showing that, they estimate 18% of CISOs are self-medicating. 38% of security executives are burning out, and many of them are leaving the industry annually. And it is. I mean, it's one of those type of jobs where you just don't. Your responsibilities aren't in a box. They aren't one thing. They tend to be very widespread, and they're constantly changing. And and I think that's one of the hard parts about the job is that there's no end date. There's no, okay, we've got it up to this level, everything's fine. No. The finish line is always being reset. There's no light at the end of the tunnel because it's constant. It's one of those jobs that, I find it exciting because it's constantly different. It's interesting. I'm fascinated by technology, but it is stressful. I mean, I do, you come into organizations that have, legacy, and you immediately, from a security perspective, think we need to get rid of that legacy and reduce that risk. However, those legacy networks are bringing in 100 million in revenue a year. So what do you think they're going to do? You've got to go ahead and look at, okay, they're not going to reduce that because they're making a lot of money off of that. However, what can we do to manage that risk? Is there other controls that we can put in place to monitor that and protect it as best we can, and then make the case for us building an updated application or an updated product in parallel, and then switch over at a later time? You start thinking of workarounds, other opportunities in which we can try to reduce the risk as much as possible. And sometimes you can only reduce it a little bit, get some insurance, do some other controls, do some other ways to monitor what's going on with that legacy app or that legacy network. And that's about as far as you can go, because the organization is not willing to do anything more because they don't want to interfere with business and upset customers.
That you mentioned a good point there. And I mean, balancing, business impact and balancing, risk, balancing economical impact, that has got to be some of the biggest challenges. And it takes, a business unit executive to go and bridge that gap, especially from a security perspective. I mean, that has got to be one of the most hardest things.
Well, and it's one of the new things that a lot of CISOs now are actually getting very good at is the partnerships, building partnerships across business units and getting other people from dev and product and HR and operations and IT to see what we're seeing and understand the risk and the impact to the business. And then at the same time, they provide the context of why the business needs whatever this risk exposure issue is that I'm trying to figure out how to manage. And then together as a team, we figure out, okay, what are we going to do about it? And that's the reason why, I've been writing a lot of these articles to make these things visible so businesses better understand our viewpoint, but at the same time to start conversations with a lot of my peers about, hey, you can't make these decisions behind closed doors because the decisions that you make as a security executive it's phenomenal, the impact on a business and strategic operations and stuff like that. And so you've got to work with your peers. You've got to work with like for me, when I was working at Webroot, I'd have to work with the VPs in the other departments, and we would come together to go ahead and make decisions. And I would find when we got together and talked, and I better understood what was going on with the product teams and with the dev teams, I could then make a better recommendation on how we were going to go ahead and manage risk, because I now understood what we were doing as a business. I understood who our customers were. I understood what the needs were for sales and what the needs were for marketing. And so it was, I mean, and that's the reason why, my whole idea of what a CISO does has shifted to being more of a business executive, because you have to go ahead and play well with the other business units, whether you like it or not.
Yeah, and I hear the idea a lot about the security professional, whether it's the top level or the junior security professional, they should be hated within an organization. I've heard people say that, as they should be causing your stress on your workload, or stopping you from doing work because you're implementing and reducing risk to the highest degree that's acceptable. But I mean, it sounds like your take's a little bit different. You shouldn't be hated. You should actually be a part of all of the other business units. It's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing about it is that it's on the security teams too. I mean, when I've looked at cybersecurity as being a service-oriented department. And my job is, I provide enterprise risk services. And my job is, I don't provide revenue, so I'm not making the company money. However, I enhance revenue operations. Okay. I help the dev teams be innovative and be able to do really cool things and go make us money, because I protect them behind the scenes by, helping them put security into their operations so that we can reduce, issues that would later, turn into some type of a legal liability, or could later turn into a security incident. And so it's, the way I look at it is, I find that, to be effective, you cannot do it in a box. It requires a CISO to be an evangelist and get out into the organization, the business, and to go ahead and talk about what they're doing. You do lunch and learns where you get people together and you buy some pizza and you buy some food, and while they're there having free food, you get a chance to chat with them and walk them through some projects that your team is doing, so they can kind of see what security is doing. You introduce them to your security team, so now all of a sudden there's faces to all the names, and now they know when they're submitting a ticket or when they're calling for help, hey, I actually know this person. I've met this person. I've met this person at lunch. Some of the security projects that you're doing, you go ahead and you let the people there know that, hey, we're going to be doing single sign-on, and I need people from several departments to volunteer and help us test this technology. You include people into what you are doing as a security department, they get more visibility into what you're doing and why you're doing it and why it's important.
Yeah.
And what ends up happening is over time, and it takes time, it isn't overnight, but what
Right.
happens is over time, you actually become part of the culture. Over time, people start trusting you, and they'll call you about things that are going on at home, or their kids did something to their computer at home, and hey, can you help me? And I don't have a problem with that, because I know then that I'm building a level of trust and I can get things done, and it's good for the company, but it does. It takes time, and it takes a CISO that's willing to go out and share and put the work in to get the company to start seeing what you're doing. And I mean, I did it when I was at the city of San Diego. I had 40 departments. Many of them had no idea what a CISO was.
Right.
But I started doing events like that where I could get people together. I started asking departments to come in during their quarterly meetings so I could brief their employees on what my department was doing and different initiatives and projects we were doing. And over time, I started getting champions. I started getting departments that wanted to partner with us on projects and initiatives. I started getting departments that would call us and say, hey, we're going to be doing this project. We want one of your people to be part of the project, to look at it from a risk and from a security perspective before we submit our paperwork to procurement.
Right.
When I start getting those kind of phone calls, I know I'm making headway and we're doing well, because people are getting it. They start seeing where security should be used. How we're, the value story starts being, I guess, more visible, for the employees and for the various departments. They start understanding, why you need the InfoSec department.
Yeah, absolutely. Another question that I'm very interested in, and I'm curious to hear kind of what your thoughts are around this, but it's the idea of this trade-off between privacy and security. For one, I'm just curious, do you think that there is potentially a trade-off there? Or two, do you think, privacy is something that we're not going to have? I don't know. What's your general thought on just the trade-off aspect, potential trade-off aspect?
Well, it's like, I guess you could say, I've looked at this, and I mean, I've argued about this with people, and the thing about it is, this whole discussion is very fluid. I mean, there's a lot of people there with heartfelt opinions on this, and I still think it's going to keep changing over time. I'm very big into personal privacy. But unfortunately, I think today privacy has almost become a commodity that you buy, not something that you're born with, unfortunately. And which to me is truly sad. Yeah. But it's I do think unfortunately, and this is one of the things I've also briefed boards about, is that you cannot be 100% secure. Yeah. I mean, you could, but the networks would be unusable.
You wouldn't have a business.
You always have some kind of a trade-off where you have to go ahead and you can put some security in, but there's always going to be some type of risk. There's always some type of a potential for an incident, some type of a potential for a breach. Privacy is very similar the same way. I mean, people want their data to be kept private. They want to go ahead and have privacy, but at the same time, they want to go ahead and use the networks. and they want to use applications. Well, unfortunately, a lot of the networks and applications need specific types of data to be able to operate, and some of that data is data that we're trying to classify now as being private. Yep. So you've got this debate going on back and forth, from everything from IP addresses and MAC addresses to geolocation data to, I mean, I think, and it's still up for debate. I mean, I understand the need for security. And I'm very big in the fact that, people, to me, I don't think privacy is something that you buy. I think it's something that you're born with, but it's, again, that's a whole other debate, probably. Yeah, sure. But all I can say on that subject is, it is very fluid right now. Yeah. A lot more people are leaning towards the fact that privacy seems to be winning over security at the moment. I think that's going to drive innovation. I think that's going to go ahead and drive, with GDPR, with the California privacy law that's out, with the new I think there's going to be a new national law dealing with privacy probably within the next 18 months.
Mm-hmm.
And all of these will, people will moan and complain and argue about it just like they did with GDPR. But I think people will adjust. People will get innovative, and we'll keep on moving forward. It's just technology and everything will shift and pivot a little bit, and we'll keep moving forward.
Yeah. Well said. Another thing, I was just curious if you had any kind of lessons learned, real world examples, interesting stories about running security for an entire city. I mean, I think that has got to be one of the hardest things out there. Is there anything that comes to mind from that kind of context?
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean it's interesting. I've had peers of mine tell me that, well, you're not really, all of your CISO jobs have been kind of small and you've never really done anything big. I'm like, dude, a city of 12,000 employees and 3 million people, the
Right.
seventh largest city in the United States, that's a $4 billion business.
Right.
I'm telling you, 25 networks, 40,000 plus endpoints, the stuff that's on the networks is amazing. Everything from police cars and ambulances to libraries, HVAC systems, laptops, desktops. It's insane the stuff that you run into.
Yeah.
But it's fascinating. For someone that loves technology, the fact that I got to partner with cyber startups and bring them in and make them part of my security program, and that's the stuff I got to do over 4 years, which is phenomenal. And some of the smart city projects and something I got to work on. Yeah, I mean, it's the best way I go ahead and I explain to people is, being a CISO for a city, especially a large city, is like being a CISO for a large business that has a mixture of manufacturing and IoT equipment and critical infrastructure, and you're providing services to customers 24/7, and some of those services are critical. And some places I've seen stuff like that are like large hospital groups, or you've got manufacturers that are creating specific types of products that are super critical for industry, and if there's any kind of change or any type of anomaly, it could trash a whole line of products, or it could destroy something. I mean, it's along those lines. I mean, it's way beyond what you would think being very simple. What you find is in an environment like that, you rely on your teams. You collaborate heavily with other CISOs and other cities and counties in the state. You work extensively with InfraGard and the FBI and DHS. They have a lot of services and stuff that they actually offer for free for municipalities and stuff, and I took advantage of them. The collaboration and the partnerships are critical for success. I mean, you realize very quickly just the scale of stuff that you're dealing with. You can't do it alone. That's the reason why I talk a lot about, you have to get out there and meet your peers. It's the same thing at the city as it is working for a corporation. You've got to meet your peers in the other business units, the other departments. You've got to understand what they're doing, what they need, how you can support them, because you need them as champions. It's the only way you're going to be successful to be able to get things done.
Yeah. Another interesting or a question I find interesting, we hear and see even the consumer not in cybersecurity now is being more educated and more aware of potential breaches and the breaches that are in the news. Can you talk about what it's like to experience a breach as a leader of security? I mean, is this something that you quickly get pointed fingers at and saying, hey, this is on you? Is this, is it just a catastrophe that happens and everyone's scrambling? I mean, what is a day in the life of a CISO when you actually experience one of these, unpredicted moments?
Well, I mean, breaches suck. It's
right. There's nothing good about it, right?
Yeah, and the thing about this is that I'm one of those people that, I kind of take it personal. I mean, these are my networks, this is my company, and I'm pissed off, if someone's messing with my family.
Yeah.
But it's that the problem is that, and I've discussed this with boards and with leadership teams. Breaches happen. You're never going to be 100% secure. What you can do is you can put controls in place and redundancy in place so you're resilient, so you don't go down.
Yeah.
You can absorb the breach and go ahead and still be able to take care of customers while you fight the fight. Predominantly when it's happening, the biggest amount of time in the first couple hours is just trying to get information. You're trying to triage the issue. You know it's not normal. Somehow or other it's gotten reported to you, whether it's to a third party or one of your employees has noticed something is going on and it's not, hey, this isn't cool, and they've gone ahead and they've called or they've submitted a ticket, and you start digging and all of a sudden you're like, holy crap, and you start getting an idea of the scale of the issue you have. That's the reason why you have to have not just an incident response policy or program, you actually need to have a team, you actually need to train. And whether it's through tabletops or whatever, you need to train so people know right away who they need to call and how they start.
Right.
And because typically what's going to happen is once you go ahead and you get that call and you realize, okay, this is not normal, and yeah, we need to triage this, you're going to stand up that IR team, and by then, your heart's pounding, adrenaline's kicking in because you're having one of those good moments, and especially if you realize, okay, hey, this is on a dev laptop and they were working with source code, or this is, with somebody in procurement who handles credit cards. All of a sudden you realize the data you're dealing with has some type of compliance or some type of critical business aspect, and you're freaking out. But at the same, you're doing that on the inside, but you have to be calm because your team's going to reflect what you do. And so for me, it's very methodical in that I stand up the IR team, I turn it over to my deputy, he starts the triage, to fight the fight. He knows the biggest thing, he would need to do is to go ahead and start collecting the initial information as to what we're dealing with and to isolate the issue to where if we can get it isolated to a specific subnet, so the rest of the network's fine, and then we can go ahead and figure out what we have. At the same time, while he's kicking that off, I'm turning around and reporting it up the chain. I'm going to our business continuity officer and saying, okay, at this time, time, blah, 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 we have this incident. This is what I know at this time. This was reported to us. This is what we're looking at. I think we might be dealing with this. We are proceeding to go ahead and isolate this part of the network, and we're troubleshooting. I will have more information for you in 1/2 hour. I will report back at time, blah, 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 and then I hang up the phone. Typically within that 1/2 hour, I'll have a better idea of the criticality of the data. I'll have a better idea of the scope of what we're dealing with. So when I call back and I talk to our business continuity officer, who typically is usually the chief operating officer, or it might be general counsel, I'll call them and tell them, okay, this is what we're dealing with. So far, this is what the team has found. We're continuing to troubleshoot and triage this issue. These are other team members that may have been called in because of the issue. And at that time, we'll make a decision as to how critical it is. And if it's seriously critical, it's dealing with some type of data that may have GDPR aspects to it, or some type of financial data that we have to report. At that time is when we'll probably stand up the BCP team. And that larger team is everybody from PR to the CEO to the CFO. The larger team will stand up because it's now become a business issue, not just a technology issue.
Wow. Yeah. Thanks for the kind of the day in the life. I can't imagine what that experience is like.
And the thing about it is that you have to stay calm about it because some of these things can go on for hours. And as you have these discussions, as one side is troubleshooting and you're working with the other side, then, as you get more information as to what you're dealing with, you may say, okay, hey, we've got cyber insurance and we've got, we've got Mandiant on retainer. Let me give them a call. I need somebody on site, just depending on how bad it is. And that's the biggest thing is these things are not over very quickly. It takes time. And that's the reason why you have to be patient, and you have to practice this. You have to go ahead and know who to call. And so everybody is comfortable. The CISO side of the house, you need to know your third parties that you need to call, not just who you would call from a forensics aspect, but if you had to call law enforcement, do you know who that is? Do you have updated phone numbers? Do you have a relationship? It's that's what I'm saying. It is It's not easy and it sucks.
Yeah, right.
Someone who's had to do it a couple of times, it sucks.
But it sounds like, you've alluded to a few times this idea of fire drills, right? Practicing and being ready for this moment because it's coming inevitably. What percent of the market do you think and that's a kind of an open-ended question, but what do you think that tabletops and all these red teaming, blue teaming, and we'll just call it fire drills, do you think that is commonly practiced and should be more?
The thing about it is I think it's commonly practiced in the more mature, larger companies.
Yeah.
A lot of the smaller companies and stuff, they're too busy trying to keep the lights on and just trying to make, and just trying to make payroll.
Yeah.
But even with them, I think they should go ahead and walk through it because honestly, they probably have an MSP or an MSSP that's providing most of their services, and that's fine. Walk through it with them. You've got a contract with them. Do you know what your SLAs are? Do you know how much time they have to respond and what they would do? And I would go ahead and request, like, say, once a quarter or once every 6 months, as you're getting your monthly report with them, set up a time, like a 2-hour time frame, to do a tabletop and just walk through with them what they would do if you had some type of a breach and they're providing MSP or MSSP services to you.
Yeah.
Walk through what the process would be and who would call and what is available to you, and so that way and that, and it's like, I would highly recommend that.
Mm-hmm. Good. Well, thank you. Okay, another interesting thing that I wanted to talk to you about. I know you've been an advisory on many boards for cybersecurity startups, and I've been working for several and am working for several security startups from kind of the vendor perspective side of the house. I'm curious. You mentioned one of your past roles as a CISO. You mentioned, I think, on this call that you've brought in cyber startups to help solve some problems. Can you talk about, for one, some of the challenges today as it is to be a kind of a cybersecurity startup, and then some of the advice and things lessons learned that you would discuss about bringing in a cybersecurity, a newer technology to solve problems and the risks maybe associated?
Well, I can tell you, like at the city, I did it. The reason I did it there was I was doing my MBA. I was finishing up my MBA at San Diego State just before I went to the city of San Diego to be a CISO. Yeah. And when I got there, I didn't have that much budget because they were still trying to figure out, exactly what a CISO was going to do. And we got that figured out, and really the city was awesome. But and what I found though was that they weren't afraid to be innovative, and that was the interesting thing, was being at a city of that size, and they did not have a problem being innovative at all. But they just needed me to explain to them how to be innovative. And so my thing was that I was like, okay, I don't have enough funding yet in my budget to do some of the stuff I need to do to build out, some monitoring and some of the security aspects that I wanted to put, on the network. Yeah. However, I know, in San Diego has a pretty large cyber startup community. And so I was like, I know several startups out here that I would love to go ahead and work with. And talking with the city lawyers, they didn't have a problem with it. So what I did was I worked a deal where, we basically signed, partnerships with them. I got the technology free for a year. They could use our city networks as a test bed. My staff would work with their staff and answer questions and help them as they were making changes and doing stuff. When they were going up for their A round, I would go ahead and talk to their VCs and be a reference for them.
Right.
And then at the end of a year, if we decided to go ahead and keep their technology, I wanted at least a 60% discount on cost.
Wow. Yeah. Cool.
And all 6 of the startups stayed with me for my last 3 years there at the city before I left.
Oh wow. Yeah.
And in fact, that's how I got to WebRoot. Was WebRoot actually bought one of the startups I was working with, and when I helped WebRoot do due diligence on the M&A, afterwards, they asked me, hey, we could use a CISO. What do you think? And by then I'd been at the city 4 years, and I was already planning on going private industry. So I was happy to jump over and try it out. But yeah, a lot of the stuff I've seen with working with startups, I mean, typically I'm in as an advisor, and I'm in as an advisor, and I walk them through, hey, if you're selling to a CISO or a security executive, these are things that you need to be aware about. There's times where I work with startups, and I may be sitting with their UX engineers and looking at their dashboards and their reports and saying, okay, you're speaking to different audiences, so you need to be able to provide different things, not just one view that's all dumped into a screen or dumped into a dashboard. And I've helped, engineer and design different views and different aspects of data. I've worked with startups, going ahead and looking at their white papers and stuff that they're trying to explain what they do. And is this a big enough problem for people to buy us or not, or is this just an added feature? And and most people don't really care, because a lot of times CISOs are tied into just trying to do basic hygiene. Hell, we're busy trying to put out the fires and just trying to manage what we have, and periodically, when we get the chance, upgrading our security stack and looking at new technology. If you're, as a startup, if your technology, you're just doing something better, and there's already 15 companies out there that are doing something better, it's extremely hard to go ahead and, what I'm saying, and get traction and really be able to go ahead and get customers to see how you differentiate between the rest of them. At RSA, I walked down row after row after row of companies doing the same crap, and I was just like, what the hell? However, if you're doing something that you're solving a problem that is unique, and I'm looking at your technology and I realize I can use your technology and actually get rid of several other things in my stack. So I can actually condense my stack, save money, still be able to solve the problem that I have. And the fact that, hey, with your RESTful API, I can plug it in here, I can pull data. Then we're talking. Because a lot of what CISOs are looking at right now is we're looking at ways in which we can condense our stack. We're looking at ways in which we can interconnect, what technologies we do have, so we can do orchestration, so we can do automation. You got smaller teams, you need to automate where you can. I need a real-time picture of what threats, what vulnerabilities I'm dealing with, what issues are going on my network, how my data is being used, where workflows are screwed up, and I can make some changes to provide value. How are you helping me with that? If your technology is standalone and does not plug into that value chain, I'm not going to talk to you. You know what I'm saying? And that's a lot of, from an advisory standpoint as a CISO, that's what I try to, I was just talking with a startup last night at dinner. But that's what I'm saying is I look at stuff like that, and because I've worked in, I've worked with the military because I was active duty. I've worked with the federal government. I've worked with municipal and state. I've now worked in private industry, and I've worked on the vendor side, and I've dealt with product, and I've dealt with customers. I've got a loop of everything. Doesn't mean I know everything. I got enough experience to be a pain in the ass, and ask questions. And really, and that's what I bring to it when I talk with startups, is to try to get them to look at that. Just because you've got a better idea on how to do SIM, or a better idea on how to do, AV, and we use AI, and we use this type of machine learning. There's hundreds of people that are doing that. What I'm saying? And that's I honestly think there's going to be, between now and RSA next year, I think there's going to be a big consolidation. There's way too much money into the market, right now with all these startups. I think there's going to be a big consolidation. I think RSA next year is going to be very different.
I feel like there has to be. You see these infographics on social media websites, and it's just how is it possible that there's that many security controls, and who in the world is using all of these?
And that's the biggest thing, is that we've got so much data and crap and logs and stuff that we're trying to deal with. And just that, as CISO and security team we're trying to deal with, think about that, just the deluge of data, and we need to be able to make decisions quickly in real time. So how are you helping us do that? Right now, that's the thing that, we're buying, is things that tie into that workflow and make that better.
Right. And I feel like there's a little bit of a trade-off when you talk about consolidation. Is I hear a lot of people that are focused on consolidating what they already have, and I feel like there's partially a trade-off between, this kind of defense in depth strategy versus, just consolidation. I'm curious, do you think it's important to have a defense in depth? Kind of this idea of controls auditing each other.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about it is you run into the fact that your perimeter now is malleable, and it's running around on tablets, and it's running around on people's cell phones and other types of devices. And so, whether you like it or not, I mean, the defenses that you're putting in place, I'm looking at. For me, I kind of moved to the securities down at the data layer. I'm looking at where the data is at, how it's being accessed, how it's being used. Zero trust, role-based, all of these different ways in which you're being able to control that. And you're going to need multiple security controls to be able to make that effective, so that you can go ahead and have data to see who's on the network and what they're accessing and where the data is at, and do they have rights for that, and what third parties are connected to the network, and how much risk are they bringing into the equation. You think your baseline's at a specific level, you've briefed that. However, that third-party network that we're connected to, because we're sharing data with them and they're a critical partner, what visibility do I have in what they're bringing?
Yeah.
How well are they doing hygiene? And so and that's, and some of these are questions that CISOs would love for some startup or somebody to come up with. Help me answer that question. Help me deal with that risk so I can quantify it and explain to the board, hey, I need a little bit more resources because I want to be able to buy something or put some kind of controls in place, because these partners that are critical to us that we need, however, they're in a country outside the United States where controls are a lot more lax, and there are issues that are going to impact us. So how do we manage that? And so it's stuff like that. I mean, when I'm looking at I can tell you when I walk the floor at a lot of these events, I don't go where all the big, huge companies are at. I'm on the other side where the smaller companies are at, because I'm always fascinated with technology. I want to see what people are doing. I'm curious about how I would hack that, or how that would be used against me. And but at the same time, I'm also looking at, okay, are they saying the same crap everybody else is saying, or do they have something really unique I've never seen before?
Yeah, and that's interesting. I mean, and it seems like that could potentially be hard to spot. I mean, especially when you're talking about like a trade show environment. I mean, what are some of the ways to kind of filter through the noise from all of these buzzwords and marketing terms? I mean, it seems like it's abundant, the amount of marketing, sling.
Well, we actually had this. There was a bunch of us CISOs were talking, and we actually had this joke that we were going to go ahead and come up with some type of metric as to where if you say AI in your sales speech so many times per minute, that's total bullshit kicked into the curb. And we were doing something like it, and it got to be so funny. It was like and then several of us were saying we could probably make it into a drinking game because it was just so funny.
Yeah.
The stuff that we're hearing people say.
But, it's comical, right?
Yeah, and but it is kind of funny. But it was, I guess the stuff that drives me crazy is that, I pretty much take for granted that people are using machine learning now to be able to do stuff.
Yeah.
And, AI, I mean, some of us kind of believe AI exists. Some of us believe AI is fiction, and it's just another version of machine learning. That debate is a whole other phone call.
I know. I'm interested in, but yeah, maybe next
time. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But I kind of look at it again as, I don't want to hear about what you're doing with machine learning. What I want to hear about is how you're going to help me solve my problems.
Yeah.
And that's what I look for, is when I walk around and I'm looking at what they're doing, I can hear the sales guy, barking to the crowd, but I can hear the SE, their engineer, sitting there talking with some customers. And those conversations I sit in and I listen. And what I'm looking for is, okay, do they know the product? What issues are they trying to solve? How well do they handle the questions? How well does the interface work? And they're moving around and they're doing stuff. How comfortable are they? It gives me an idea maturity-wise where are they at? And so I look for that kind of stuff when I'm walking the floor.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Well, we can wrap it up here pretty soon, but I had a couple more questions. I wanted to talk about, you're coming from yourself, a veteran, a real leader in this, kind of cybersecurity realm as we know it. And I wanted to talk about maybe see if you could talk about some of the potential, projections or predictions you have from our next latest and greatest evolution of threats, managing risks, staying educated, just kind of all things in general when it comes to, the future of projections and predictions.
Well, I mean, and honestly, I'm not on a threat team, so there's a caveat there. So I don't want anybody throwing rocks at us.
Yeah, that's not specifically, what exact threat,
Yeah.
but just.
But I mean, the thing about it is I've talked about this at several different events. I don't see the threats, stopping anytime soon. It's just not. There's money in it. This is a business model, for the entities that are doing it, whether they're doing it from a nation state standpoint to help their countries, or whether it's the criminal organization that they're part of, and and it's just the way that they go ahead and they make money and the way they leverage technology. The sad thing is that they're when we advance and come up with new technologies, and they're using those same technologies to go ahead and advance and come up with with new ways to get around our controls and to make money. I honestly look at the fact that we're in a digital Cold War. Really, they go ahead and they innovate and come up with some type of new threat, some type of new issue that we've got to deal with. We innovate and got a new startup, got a new technology, got a new way to go ahead and deal with it, and then they innovate, and then we innovate. It just goes back and forth. And I don't see it stopping anytime in the foreseeable future. My concerns are that so much is being connected to the networks now. So much of the critical infrastructure, so many of the IoT and the OT type infrastructure that's being connected, things that if they get hacked and it really goes bad, you're probably looking at mass scale death, stuff like that I'm really concerned about. I think we're probably only a couple of years away from having an incident like that, where right now a lot of the IoT security issues, we've been lucky, where cities have been hacked and hospitals have been hacked, and stuff like that. And I only think it's a matter of time before one of these things goes really bad and it impacts an area. Like, you lose a power station and a city's down, or municipal areas down for days, or we go ahead and we lose a hospital, and that hospital has critical burn units, for their area, and people die. I mean, I honestly think we're going to see that in the future. We're going to see these, the types of attacks and stuff we're dealing with are going to have more of an impact, and it's going to get ugly, and I wish I had good news. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why this job as a CISO is extremely stressful. Is because many of us see what's coming. Many of us are dealing with this daily, and in many ways, it's very relentless.
Yeah. How do you sleep?
And not very well. And the thing about this is that it's part of the job. In fact, it was interesting. I mean, I was asked a telling question yesterday why I do this job.
Why?
Because currently right now, my company was acquired, and so I was. I helped with the transition, turned everything over, and I'm now searching for my next role, as a CISO. And I've had multiple people ask me, why do you want to know the CISO role? And I find being a CISO and leading security teams is very similar to like when it was when I was wearing a uniform when I was in the military. I still want to serve. I still want to be, have an impact and be able to provide and help, my organization and lead teams of professionals. And I still miss that, and that's what a CISO means to me, is being part of that. And, the good thing is, I guess I look at it is that, I don't see my role going away anytime soon. The bad thing is the stuff that we're fighting. I don't see that going away anytime either.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Gary, we're about out of time. Can you tell me and the listeners, what's the best way to engage with you, to connect with you? What are some of the things that you're working on now and looking to, accomplish here in the future?
Well, obviously, I'm trying to find a job. Besides that, yeah, you can go ahead. Typically, I tell people just go ahead and they can reach out either on Twitter or on LinkedIn. I use LinkedIn as my platform to go ahead and publish a lot of my content. I share it over on Peerless and on Twitter. So that's typically you can reach me there. Right now with my two co-authors, we've got the CISO Desk Reference Guides Volume 1 and 2 out. We're actually working on Book 3 with some other co-authors. We're writing up a book on threat intelligence, which I think is going to be really, really good. And we're hoping to have that out by Black Hat.
Oh, great.
So we'll have Book 3 out by Black Hat. I'm working on an ebook, basically cybersecurity for SMBs, for small businesses.
Oh, nice.
They may not do the full Monte, that like a big company would do, but they still need cyber.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to walk them through how you would build your first security program, what policies you would need, what issues you might think about when you're signing up with an MSP, that kind of stuff. And so I'm hoping to have that, available by next month.
Great.
So I'm working with my co-authors. So I'm, working on that. We're also looking at putting together a kind of like a reference guide for the board for, executive teams on how to work with the CISO and the security team.
Yeah.
So we've got like multiple projects we're working on. So it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, that sounds like great stuff. And I would love to get some of those links and titles to put in the show notes. So I'll take that offline.
Yeah, definitely.
Hey, Gary, it's been a pleasure, man. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Well, thank you very much.